plasmids, and then so we discussed the I don't think we discussed the classification of plasmids, or did we?
Ma'am, perhaps not. We didn't.
Ma'am, we did not.
Okay, okay. So plasmids can be classified in a number of ways. So first classification is based upon the function. So for example, fertility plasmids were named as F. Resistance plasmids were named as R because they conferred resistance to certain antibiotics. Col plasmids were named as col because they were producing a compound called colicin, and which can kill other bacteria. It was a bacteriocin. So these plasmids were named as col plasmids, and the example is coli1. Degradative plasmids were the ones which contained the genes for degradation. So, for example, degradation of toluene, degradation of polyaromatic hydrocarbons, etc. So, these plasmids were named as degradative plasmids. Virulence plasmids were the ones which could turn the bacterium into a pathogen, and the best example for virulence plasmids is the plasmid which is present in the bacterial strain Bacillus anthracis. Bacillus anthracis actually causes anthrax, right? And this anthrax, right, this anthrax toxin is produced from a plasmid. So for example, Bacillus subtilis is non-pathogenic. The moment you put the plasmid from isolated from Bacillus anthracis, the Bacillus subtilis become pathogenic. So these plasmids are called as virulence plasmids because they confer the genes for virulence, and they can be cured. Once they are cured, then the strain will become non-pathogenic, and once you put this plasmid in another strain, it will confer pathogenicity to that strain. Okay, so then the next classification is about cryptic plasmids. So cryptic plasmids class are the plasmids which do not have any phenotype. Okay, the ones which do not confer any phenotype. No antibiotic resistance, no metal resistance, no pathogenicity, no degradation, nothing. They do not confer any phenotype. But then the question is why a bacterial cell is maintaining these cryptic plasmids, because plasmids usually were considered to be some kind of beneficial to the survivability of the cell. So there are reports which say that bacterial cells, they harbor plasmids because it helps the bacterial cell to survive under the conditions of stress or some kind of adaptation or some kind of, for example, environment like polluted environment. So these features are accessory features, but they help the bacterial strain in survivability, but then they are not essential, and that is why they can be cured. But then the question is why the cell is harboring cryptic plasmids which are not conferring any function. So nowadays a lot of research students is going on identifying the function of cryptic plasmids. So people are thinking that maybe they are not conferring any visible phenotype, but maybe they are providing some added advantage to the cell, due to which cell is harboring this metabolic burden. Okay, so then the next classification is based upon, for example, based upon the
Um,
host range. So host
uh,
range, yes,
I am
Rajneesh.
saying if a DNA fragment there are a lot of DNA in take for example in eukaryotes, all that non-coding DNA, they don't have any use of that. We don't have any use, so they are also there. So why are we talking about if plasmids are not useful, then why they are in the cell? That can also be just like an extra a copy and extra sequence that can go just like that. So why are we talking about like we need an use of that sequence? Then only it should be in the bacteria. Otherwise, it should not be in the bacteria.
Right. So the point that you are seeing, Ratnesh, is that you have many extra DNA, like we were discussing minimal genome, but then there are lots of sequences which are not required but which are there in the cell. But then the question is, they are part of the chromosome. Plasmid is a separate entity. So maintaining a separate entity versus maintaining it in the form of a chromosome is there is a big difference. When you are talking about maintaining it as a separate entity, that means you require proteins for replication, whereas when it is part of the whole chromosome, the initiation proteins, everything is there. It's only that it will take longer time, right? But plasmids are a separate entity, and they have to be initiated separately, they have to be replicated separately. So that is why this is an additional burden on the replication proteins, on the segregation proteins. And I'll be telling you that how, I mean, there are, if the plasmid is not so important, then it better integrates with the chromosome. It need not be maintained as a separate entity. But if it is maintained as a separate entity, that means the cell requires that particular DNA in that many copies. Okay, so what is copies? I'll be telling you in a second. Okay, Ratnesh.
Yes, ma'am.
So then host range, I'll be telling you in a second about copy number.
Okay, ma'am.
So host range is the range of bacterial host or range of other organisms in which the plasmid can replicate. So based upon this, the plasmids are classified as a narrow host range and broad host range. Narrow host range plasmids are the plasmids which can replicate in a narrow range, like it can replicate only in a limited number of bacteria. So for example, the plasmid PUC19 or the plasmid PSC101, which was discovered by Stanley Cohen, they all can replicate only and only in E. coli and maybe in one or the bacteria, and that's it. So these plasmids are considered as narrow host range plasmids. Broad host range plasmids, on the other hand, are the ones which can replicate in a broad range of bacteria. So for example, the plasmid RSF1010 or the plasmid T are like really broad host range plasmids. They can replicate in, for example, Agrobacterium, E. coli. They can replicate in certain gram positive bacteria. So they are like really broad host range plasmids, and in fact RSF1010 is having the broadest host range reported so far, because it can even be transferred via agrobacterium to even plants. So this particular plasmid can replicate in gram negative bacteria, gram positive bacteria, and can be even transferred to plants. So therefore, the reason I mentioned this classification is because when we talk about cloning and when we talk about, for example, particularly gene cloning, and then the host becomes important, and in that case the context of plasmid becomes important, that which particular plasmid you should use depending upon the situation. When the work is limited only and only to E. coli, you can simply go for narrow host range plasmids. But on the other hand, if your work is limited to not just E. coli but to a wide range of gram negative or gram positive bacteria, then you better select a broad host range plasmid. The next classification is on the copy number. So copy number of a plasmid is the number of copies of a particular plasmid in a cell. Okay, so it has been demonstrated that every plasmid has a defined copy number. That is, the number of copies of that plasmid present in a cell is actually fixed. It is not random. Okay, so therefore, based upon the copy number, the plasmids can be classified
Excuse me,
as.
ma'am.
Huh? Yes.
Ma'am, you said that these plasmids can be transferred to plants as well. So, Can we transfer them in like animals also?
Okay, so in animals, so uh, there are plasmids, but then they are, so what people do is like people construct viral vectors, right? So when they construct viral vectors, they do have an origin of plasmid because bacterial system is the best to maintain larger copies, to get larger copies. So what people do is like they prepare large amount of plasmid, and then once you have obtained that plasmid, you can put it in mammalian host. But in that case, so what I meant, Ashi, is that yes, plasmids can be transferred to plants, plasmids can be transferred to mammalian cells. Plasmid, like these days, the newer vaccine, the COVID vaccine, it's a plasmid based vaccine, right? So they do, I mean, they can be transferred, but then what I wanted to tell you is the origin of replication. So when I was talking about RSF 1010, so it's the RSF 1010 origin which works in even gram-negative, gram-positive bacteria and in plants, right? But when we talk about mammalian cells, we require a viral origin of replication. So we construct what is called as a shuttle vector, which I'll be telling you in a while. Let's first understand what are plasmids, and then I'll be discussing with you briefly about plasmids as vectors. And then there are different types of vectors, Ashi, like Fajmid vectors, Phosmid vectors, Quasmid vectors, shuttle vectors. So they contain two different ori, one of plasmid ori and one of, let's say, viral origin of replication, or one of plasmid, one of, for example, a lambda phage, something like this. Okay. So I'll be
Yes, ma'am.
briefly discussing about vectors, but I will not be discussing in details about Fajmid Cosmid vectors. You will learn in the course 733. But I'll give you just an idea. Okay, so about the copy number class, so plasmids can have a defined copy number, and based upon that they can be classified as high copy number, medium copy number, or low copy number plasmids. So when we talk about high copy number plasmids, the copy number can vary from easily from 400 to 500 copies per cell. And the example for this is particular plasmid can have a maximum of up to 500 copies in a single bacterial cell. Medium copy numbers, so these plasmids are usually present in 15 to 20 or maybe 30 copies per cell. And for this, the examples are plasmid PSC101 and plasmid. These plasmids are medium copy number plasmids because in these the copies are present in the range of 15 to 20. Low copy number plasmids, as the name itself says, the copies are going to be in the range of 1 to 2 copies per cell. Okay, and the examples for these are plasmid. Plasmid is the same, which is fertility plasmid, and P1 plasmid is uh, another plasmid. So they both are like mega plasmids of approximately 100 kb in size. So what people have done is like they make mini F or mini P1. So mini F and mini P1 are the minimal replicons of the megaplasmid P1 or minimal replicon of the megaplasmid F, and then these minimal replicons are called as mini F and mini P1. But the advantage is that once you have this mini F or mini P1, you can easily clone very large inserts so that the final size of the plasmid is up to 100 kb, because that is the original size of the plasmid. And therefore that makes sense also because the size is so big, it's like 100 kb, and therefore it is present in low copy number because it will take some time to replicate the entire 100 kb. So this plasmid is present in low copies, 1 to 2 copies. So then the question is why the cell have different types of plasmids. Some are high copy, some are medium copy, and some are low copy. And how does cell ensures that each plasmid is maintained in the cell and it is not lost? So for this purpose class, the cell has maintained certain mechanisms for not losing the plasmid. So particularly for low copy number plasmids. Okay. When we talk about low copy number plasmids such as P1 or F, right, when the plasmid is present in only 1 to 2 copies, so that means if one daughter doesn't receive the plasmid, then it will be lost, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you
Yes,
people
ma'am, we are here.
Okay, so then that plasmid will be lost. So then the cell has developed a mechanism which is called. So these plasmids, class, listen to me this part carefully. So these plasmids have a region which is called as a centromere, and onto this centromere partitioning proteins bind. And these partitioning proteins, they are actually ATPases. So therefore it's an active process, and these plasmids are segregated. That means they are partitioned to the two daughter cells in an active segregation manner. So the point I'm trying to tell you is that the cell cannot lose these plasmids, and these plasmids are very stable and they are not lost at all, because the cell has active partitioning system which consists of a centromere and partitioning proteins which are called in maintaining the plasmid to the daughter cells, and therefore these plasmids are not lost. Likewise, when we talk about high copy number plasmids, so for example 500 copies are there in case of plasmid PUC19. In which cases they do not contain any active partitioning apparatus. So these plasmids are randomly segregated. Okay, randomly segregated or partitioned. That means they are randomly distributed to the two daughter cells. So then what happens is that why there is no active segregation machinery for these plasmids is because they are present in so high copies that even if one daughter receives only one copy, right, and the other daughter receives 499 copies, still the cell has this machinery to maintain this 1 to 500 and maintain 499 to 500. So therefore the cell doesn't require this active partitioning machinery for high copy number plasmids. Medium copy number plasmids partitioning apparatus usually. So they are also most of the time they are randomly segregated, but then there are few reports, for example for plasmid R1, there are different mechanisms which ensure the stability of the plasmid. Okay, so next classification is based upon the plasmid incompatibility. What is plasmid incompatibility? So two plasmids class, two if they have different requirements. So by this, what in simple words, what we can say is that if there are two plasmids in a cell and they both have similar requirements for replication, then usually there will be a crisis of replication proteins, because both of them will be there will be a fight, there will be an internal competition in the cell for the replication proteins, and then one plasmid wins and the other one is lost. So such plasmids are called as incompatible, whereas two plasmids are called compatible if they have different replication requirements. So by this, what I mean is that, for example, let's talk about plasmid PSC101 and 19. They both are compatible because they have different replication requirements. Likewise, plasmid PUC19 and let's say plasmid RSF1010, they are compatible because they have different replication requirements. So that is how we can classify the plasmids based upon their incompatibility, and there are different groups, there are different classifications, and based upon that the plasmids are clustered together which have similar requirements. So in all, we discussed that plasmids can be classified based upon host range, based upon copy number, based upon compatibility, and based upon function. So once you have learned this, then let us discuss how these plasmids can be used as vectors. So vectors means carriers. So carriers of certain genes, right? So when we talk about vectors, these vectors can be of many types, but in general, classification is cloning vectors and expression vectors. So cloning vectors are the vectors which are used for cloning a particular gene. Okay, just for cloning a particular gene. Expression vectors, on the other hand, as the term itself says, these are the vectors which can be used for expression of a gene. So students, try to understand the difference. Cloning vector means you are just going to clone a gene. Once the gene is cloned, it can be present just in the form of a gene and it may not give you any expression. This cloning can be for preparation of a probe, for southern hybridization. This cloning can be simply for example, sequencing. This cloning can be simply for mutagenesis. This cloning can be simply for example, trying to understand the different, let's say, the length of the gene, or maybe, for example, for having that gene in more copies. It has nothing to do with expression. But when we talk about expression vectors are the vectors which are used for expression of the gene. So that means in these vectors, once the gene is cloned, we can use these vectors for expression of the gene to make a functional protein. Okay, so let us see what are the differences in the structure of cloning vectors and expression vectors. Following class?
Yes, ma'am.
What
Yes,
about others? Are you people there or left already?
yes, ma'am, you're there.
Yes, ma'am, we're there.
So when we talk about cloning vectors, so the essential features of these vectors are, so maybe now you people tell me, forget about vectors. Let's say if it's a plasmid. So what are the essential features of a plasmid? I mean, what makes a plasmid?
The origin.
Have an origin of replication. Yes. Anything else that you are aware of?
Ma'am, it should have like a group of restriction sites where all the restriction sites are there.
Okay. So class, the essential features of a cloning vector are, it requires an origin of replication. That's a must. Without that, the plasmid cannot replicate. A cloning
Ma'am,
vector.
also I guess an antibiotic selection cassette.
Right. So the cloning vectors have to be small in size. Why? Why do you think they should be smaller in size? Why we cannot make a 100 kb cloning vector?
Ma'am, that will take more time for replication.
Yes, and so it should be small in size because yes, it will take more time for replication, point number one. And point number two, because cloning vectors, right? As the name itself says, cloning, that means they are the vectors for gene cloning. So if the vector size is too big, then you cannot clone very large inserts. So the smaller the vector, you can clone larger inserts, right? Larger DNA fragments. Is it making sense or no?
Ma'am, can you explain?
So, so what I mean is that cloning usually are in the range of 2 to 3 kb. That's a preferred range, right? And plasmids usually can hold inserts up to 10 kb easily. I mean, this doesn't include the plasmids F1 and P1, because F and P1 are megaplasmids and they are low copy number plasmids, so they are not used conventionally for cloning. So students, I'm using the word conventionally. That means they are used at times for cloning very large inserts, but usually for routine gene cloning, we do not use these low copy number megaplasmid based vectors. We usually go for high copy or medium copy number plasmids, which are usually smaller in size. The reason we select smaller sized plasmids is so that they can hold larger inserts. So for example, if the approximate size of plasmid which can be stably maintained is 10 kb, and if the cloning vector size is 2.6 kb or 3 kb or 5 kb, then the size of the size of the DNA that can be cloned is a maximum 5 kb, right? But on the other hand, if your cloning vector is 9 kb, then the size of the insert that can be cloned will be only 1 kb. That's the point I'm trying to make, that for routine cloning purposes, it is better that the vector should be smaller in size so that it can accommodate larger inserts, so that the final size of the plasmid is within the range of its stable maintenance. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The next point is that the plasmids are usually medium to high copy number, and the reason again is so that you have sufficient copies of that. So these are the two features which should be there when we are selecting the cloning vectors. Now when we talk about in the structure or in the sequence, the first feature is origin of replication. So it has to be there in the plasmid so that it can initiate replication. Uh, then the next point is it usually contains selectable marker. So selectable marker, the reason we use the word selectable marker is because once we put this plasmid inside the cell, right? Once the plasmid introduced, there should be a way of selecting the cells which have taken up the plasmid or which have not taken up the plasmid. Plasmid free cell versus plasmid containing cell. Is it clear? So how can we identify a cell which has taken up a plasmid versus a cell which has not taken up a plasmid? So let's say you have 1 million cells. Now out of 1 million cells, when we put the plasmid, it is not necessary that every cell will take up the plasmid. So uptake of plasmid doesn't take place in every cell. So then if we do not have a selection marker, then we will not be able to discriminate between a plasmid free cell versus a plasmid containing cell. Right? Class? And therefore what is used is a selectable marker, and this selectable marker is usually antibiotic resistance genes. So antibiotic resistance genes that are commonly used are genes for ampicillin resistance, genes for chloramphenicol, or genes for kanamycin. So these are some of the commonly used antibiotics. The mechanism of action of these antibiotics we are going to discuss when I will be teaching you translation protein synthesis, because most of these antibiotics, they either inhibit protein synthesis, or some of them affect the membrane permeability, but we'll be discussing this when I will be teaching you protein synthesis. But what we do is that we clone the gene for these antibiotic resistance in the plasmid, and then this plasmid will now be different from the native plasmid, because other than origin of replication, it now has a selectable marker, due to which we can, once we plate the cells harboring this plasmid, which contains resistance to antibiotic, it will help the plasmid harboring cells to survive in the presence of antibiotic stress. Is it clear? Class? Everybody is quiet?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. It is.
Okay. So then the next feature is restriction sites for cloning of the gene of interest. So multiple restriction sites are introduced for cloning the gene of interest, and because multiple sites are present and they are clustered at one place, therefore this is also called as multiple cloning site, or is also MCS, multiple cloning site. Okay, so cloning vectors essential features are origin of replication, number one, selectable marker, number two, and number three, restriction sites for cloning the gene of interest. And you will learn in a while that how antibiotic resistance genes can be cloned, and how we can make our own cloning vector in the lab, and how we can introduce restriction sites for gene cloning. But let us first understand and let us look at the structure of two cloning vectors, which in fact you will be using in the lab as well when you will be performing the experiments, and these are the most commonly used cloning vectors. So these are the cloning vectors. So let me make it a little more big. So the first one that you can see, class, is the plasmid PBR322. The size of the plasmid is 4.3 kb, or 4363 base pairs. What you see is that this plasmid is, let's look at all the features of first PBR322. So PBR322 is a small plasmid, 4.3, and as I told you just now, it's a medium copy number plasmid, right? It has an origin of replication which is marked as ORI, right? It has an antibiotic selection marker. APR is for ampicillin and TET-R is for tetracycline.
Excuse me, ma'am. I just had a question.
Yes.
I like in many plasmids I've seen, like even in the one shown on the right, it has that LAGZ promoter or the lacoperon. So what is the function of that?
So that I'll be telling you in a while. Let's go step by step. So that is alpha complementations, that is for screening. So I thought first let's understand the plasmids, then we will discuss how we can do cloning, and then I'll teach you how we can do directional cloning and how LAGZ can help you in cloning. So then we'll discuss. Let's go step by step. Let's understand first PBR322, then PUC19. Okay. So in this particular plasmid, as you see, this is the origin of replication, and it has two antibiotic selection markers. One is for ampicillin and one is for or tetracycline. Usually when we look at a plasmid map, the unique restriction sites are shown. So that means they usually show the sites which are unique to the particular sequence. So for example, PVO2 is a unique site. EcoR1 is a unique site for the restriction enzyme. PST1 is a unique site for the restriction enzyme, right? But for example, if there are certain sites, let's say maybe Hindi3, BAMH1, okay, let's say SMA1. So SMA1 is not shown here because maybe there are two sites of SMA1, one present in, let's say, TET and one present in ampicillin. It is possible. So usually students, when a plasmid map is shown, usually unique sites are shown in the map. The cloning vectors that are commonly used for gene cloning are circular, medium copy number, small in size, and should contain an origin of replication and an antibiotic resistance gene marker. Now, I also told you that they should contain a multiple cloning site, right? So in case of PBR322, the cloning sites are shown uh, from EcoR1 to NRU1. So EcoR1, CLA1 and Hindi3, they are outside of tetracycline resistance gene cassette, and therefore they can be used for gene cloning. But you can also use EcoR5, BAMH1, SPH1, SAL1 or NRU1 also for gene cloning. So I'll be telling you in a second the advantage of using the sites which are present within the tetracycline resistance gene for gene cloning. Okay. The second cloning vector is PUC18. So there are PUC18 and PUC19 are very similar. The only difference is in terms of its directionality, but otherwise the sequence wise they are very similar. So again, it's a small plasmid, 2.6 kb. It is present in up to 500 copies, I told you just now. So it's a high copy number plasmid, small in size, 2.6 kb, 2686 base pairs, circular in shape, and contains an antibiotic resistance gene cassette for ampicillin resistance, and it contains a multiple cloning site. So in this case class, what you can see is that the restriction sites are clustered together from EcoR1, KPN1, SMA1, BAMH1, XPA1, SAL1, PST1, Hindi3 and so on. So they are all clustered together. So this is also called as multiple cloning site. So in this case, the multiple cloning site is present internal to a sequence of a gene which confers the resistance to an enzyme which is called as beta galactosidase. So LAGC encodes for beta galactosidase. So class, in PBR322, we find that many unique restriction sites are present within the tetracycline resistance gene, and in PUC19 or PUC18, there are many restriction sites which are present within the LAGC, right? But then there are certain other cases where you do not have any gene, for example, neither tetracycline nor LAGC, but yet you will have clustering of clustering of restriction sites. So let us see how these cloning vectors can be used for gene cloning. We talk about gene cloning class. The gene of interest. Now the class should tell me this answer, that what are the various methods for obtaining the gene of interest that you are aware of so far. Class, tell me.
Ma'am, southern blotting and hybridization. First of
Okay, but before southern blotting, you need to do something.
ma'am, restriction and digestion.
Yes, very good. Restriction, digestion, and Gene of interest can be obtained by restriction digestion, and it can
And
PCR is
using mRNA.
धीरे धीरे
mRNA.
from mRNA, okay, but from mRNA also, okay, let me write it. From mRNA, what are we going to do?
Ma'am,
reverse
then reverse transcription and then
Get the
cDNA,
cDNA from it.
and then the cloning, we do PCR and whatever.
Right. So you do PCR, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that means the gene of interest can be obtained by restriction digestion. In case of restriction digestion, DNA, or the source can be another plasmid DNA, right? You can simply digest it with a restriction enzyme and obtain the desired gene, right? Or you can simply do PCR, and PCR can be used whenever the sequence information is there, irrespective of whether the source is bacterial sample. So in this case you can simply PCR out from the genomic DNA, or PCR the gene out using the bacterial colony, right? Or in case of mammalian cells, you can prepare mRNA, do reverse transcriptase, prepare cDNA, and then subject it to PCR. So
I just had another. So, for example, if the gene of interest itself contains like restriction sites, which is pretty possible, then won't it be like breaking down during restriction digestion?
I'll tell you in a second.
Yes, ma'am, it should be broken down.
Ratnesh?
I said that it will be broken down.
Right, so we'll discuss this. So if the gene of interest contains the restriction site, then how to do it, right? I'll come back to this in a second, but let's first understand.
And ma'am, one last thing. So when we don't know the sequence, we use restriction digestion, and then like we use southern blotting or anything to separate the mixture of DNA that we have, and
Right.
then we'll have to transform the DNA into cells and observe the phenotype, right, to identify the gene. Like
Yeah.
before that, we completely separate it, right?
Right, but that's the next step. Vishantan, you are moving.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Let's go step
No,
by step.
fine, ma'am.
Let's not confuse the class. Let's go slowly. So let's first understand gene cloning, then alpha complementation, then expression vectors, then transformation, conjugation
Ma'am,
instructions. So you're talking about introducing the constructed vector in a cell. That's the next
ma'am,
step. Hmm.
when we know the sequence or maybe we have the RNA, then why do we need to insert and again know the phenotype for separating the gene?
Yeah, say it again.
I'm saying like why do we need to again insert the gene to know the phenotype to gene express what the gene is expressing, or to know that it is exactly the gene, because we already know the either the sequence or we have the mRNA.
Right, so there are multiple answers for this question. So when we do PCR, right, so PCR at times can be non-specific as well. So you are assuming that you have amplified because your primer is very specific, but then at times you can find a non-specific amplification as well. So that's one reason that almost always after PCR, either you proceed with sequencing and then proceed for expression, or you check for phenotype. So PCR often results in mutation. Sometimes one mutation has been introduced if the gene length is long, right? So even though you are using high fidelity polymerase, but if for example you are cloning a cluster of gene of, let's say, 3 kb, so in that case you would like to be absolutely sure that there is no mutation. So it is very important to clone it, and then once you clone it, you can sequence it, you can express it, you can check it, Many things are possible. That's one answer. Second answer is when we know that okay, this is the starting material and we are preparing the mRNA. So class, when we prepare the mRNA, this mRNA is total. From the total RNA, it's a population of mRNA. So when we make cDNA, although you are using again specific primers, but still you need to be absolutely sure that yes, this is what you got. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so where were we? Gene of interest often contains the restriction site. I think we did not discuss gene cloning, right? Let's first discuss gene cloning, and then I will tell you how, what kind of methods can be used if the restriction site is internal to the gene of interest. So in this diagram, what you can see is that two DNA molecules, which for example, which are generated by digesting with EcoR1, right? So it's GAA-TTC. So how they can join back, right? So this is GAA-TTC and you have digested it with EcoR1. The phosphodiester bond is cleaved, and then you can see that sticky ends or cohesive ends or protruding ends are created. Now these ends can join back and phosphodiester bonds can be formed with the help of an enzyme called T4DNA ligase. We'll say DNA ligase is used, but DNA ligase is required in DNA replication, and E. coli also has DNA ligase. It is used for sealing the nicks, if you remember, during replication. So it is the same enzyme which is used here. So E. coli also has DNA ligase, but then it is not that efficient. What is used is the ligase from a bacteriophage, which is called T4 DNA ligase. So T4 is the name of the bacteriophage from which this DNA ligase is obtained, and this DNA ligase can actually help in the formation of the phosphodiester bond. So once you perform restriction digestion, then you can join the fragment, join the gene of interest with the vector with the help of an enzyme called DNA ligase, and the one which is commonly used is T4 DNA ligase. And it requires often ATP for carrying out the reaction. Now let us again look back at the plasmid map and then see the possibilities. In this case class, let's say, put it here. For example, the gene of interest that we are cloning has a site Okay, let's say this is the gene of interest, and this you have obtained from maybe genomic DNA by restriction digestion or by PCR, right? So if it is obtained by PCR class, then again, when you want to clone a gene, what do we need to do in the PCR primers? Let's see if you remember. For cloning a gene which is amplified by PCR, what should be done in the PCR primers to ensure for gene cloning? We discussed in the last class, just last class. Marie, what happened to my class? Let me see
Ma'am,
you
we
people.
have
Just
ma'am,
keen, Bhavya, Deepak, Ashi.
ma'am, we had to add extra fragment to ensure that the PCR primer attached to the DNA so that it can replicate it.
Okay, so yes, but what is in the extra sequence? We just discussed in the last class. That means you people are not following. For gene cloning, can we use, okay, so let me put it this way. So let's say my sequence is D, A, T, G, C, G. Okay, so tell me what will be the forward primer for this one? For gene cloning. And let us say I would like to clone it because the class is familiar with EcoR1. How can we clone the amplicon, the PCR product, at EcoR1 site in PBR322? Should I tell you you forgot or you did not follow or what? Tell me clearly. I will explain you. But you need to tell me whether you did not follow or whether you forgot.
I'm not getting the question.
Okay, so the question is, the gene sequence is this, right? Okay, and there are few more sequences here. I'm not typing the whole sequence here. And then, for example, this is the gene that you would like to amplify by PCR, and you would like to clone this PCR product at EcoR1 site in this plasmid and in this plasmid. So we had discussed, I'm sure the class knows now how to design PCR primers. So then we discussed first you need to design PCR primers, and then we discussed how to design PCR primers for gene cloning just in the last class. Deepak, आशी, जसकीन, रत्नेश, कुछ नहीं याद सब
Ma'am,
भूल
we
गया?
add a recognition site to it, as in the
Yes,
extra sequence and a recognition site, and then the gene to be cloned, and the same on the opposite side.
very good. What happened to my class? Others? Ratnesh, Vishantan, Deepak. Do you
No, ma'am, it's
agree
clear.
with this or no?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so finally, thank you, Ashi. At least you could remember. So I hope the logic is clear that we are going to introduce an EcoR1 site so that ultimately class when you will have your product has to have a site for EcoR1 here and a site for EcoR1 here, right? Yes or no? Nobody is speaking today. Don't
Yes, ma'am,
sleep
on both the sides.
on both the sides. So without board it is difficult, but still I'm trying. Uh, so maybe I'll put it this way. So here maybe we can add. So GAA in the primer. Right? And do you remember Ashi? What else we need to do? Deepak, Vishantan? Merely adding
We need to
EcoR1
add
site
the
is
extra
enough.
sequence prior to this.
Right. So prior to this, you need to add an extra sequence. And why do we need that? Why do we need that, class?
To ensure the uniqueness of the site so that it can be found at a particular place.
To ensure the uniqueness, okay, but it is actually to ensure that the restriction enzyme, see, restriction enzyme usually recognizes double-stranded DNA. So when the site is present at the edge, because it will be present at the edge, once you will get this amplicon, right? Okay, let me make it here. then maybe it will become clearer. So
Ma'am, basically it was to prevent the restriction site being at the end, because if it is at the end, then the cut won't be produced properly.
right. So see, there are many copies, right, by PCR. Now what will happen is in all of these cases, the restriction site is present at the ekdam edge. Correct. It is present at one edge, at this edge and at this edge. So the point is that you want to give enough space, enough sequence for the restriction enzyme to sit and bind and then cleave. And therefore, we need to give a few extra bases followed by the sequence and followed by the forward primer. So what will be the forward primer? For this sequence, what will be the forward primer?
Simply ATGC, GA, GAT.
Good. And likewise, you can design a reverse primer where again some extra bases, then GAA, TTC, and then followed by the reverse primer. And what will be the reverse primer here?
TCA, TA.
Yes, very good, Vishantan. So ultimately, class, you will have lot of these applicons, and all of these applicons, class, will have at the edges a sequence which is this. Everybody agrees with this or no? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Vishantan?
Yes, ma'am.
In this case, ultimately, all of these amplicons will have an equivalent site. So what will be the next step? The next step will be that you do PCR amplification. I have 1 more minute. So you do PCR amplification, right? And then what you do is you digest the amplicon, the amplified product with EcoR1, right? Digest the vector with EcoR1. So in this case, this vector is digested with EcoR1 here. Your PCR product is also digested with EcoR1 here. So then ideally, if you now put T4 DNA ligase, then what can happen? What are the possibilities? Tell me. The possibilities. Are
The
you
first
people
is that
for
the amplicon reanneals.
first will be
The amplicon reanneals.
so the word we use is ligate, है ना, ligase. So the word classes that is used is DNA ligation. So let me write it here, DNA ligation. So it's amplicon self-ligate. Okay, possibility 2. Very good, Vishant.
The vector self-ligates.
Self-ligate. Okay, and last.
Basically, the
Amplicon and vector
vector and
ligate.
the amplicon and vector ligate. Where they got
Vector
that.
plus amplicon ligation. What you desire, right? Which is what is the cloning of amplicon, right? So you are interested in the C point, right? Class. So then the point is
Yes.
amplicon self-ligate. If we put it in a bacterial cell, can it replicate? Very quickly, then I'll stop.
No, ma'am.
Amplicons? No, very good. Vector self-ligate? Can it give you colonies?
It can, right?
Yes, very good.
It has
Vector
the
plus
origin. So, yes.
it will. Vector plus amplicon.
Vector plus amplicon will also.
Yes.
will
So now
also
the
put.
next question is, yes, so that raises the next question, that if amplicon self-ligate will not give you colonies, but vector self-ligate can give you colonies, and vector plus amplicon or restriction digested fragment will give you colonies. So the question is how to discriminate a bacterial cell which has taken up the insert versus which has not taken up the insert. And that brings to the next question which Vishantan has raised on the use of Laxi or on the use of tetracycline resistant zinc acid. But I think it is already 10, so maybe we will discuss it in the next class. Or if you do not have class, I can quickly tell you. But I guess you people have, right?
We do have another lecture.
Okay, yes.